Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, we discuss vulnerability management for IoT and OT devices with sponsor Palo Alto Networks. These devices, so think video cameras, sensors, medical equipment, industrial control systems, and so on, present unique challenges when it comes to finding, prioritizing, and managing software vulnerabilities. Our guest from Palo Alto Networks is Kalyan Saddam, Director of Product Management. Kalyan, welcome to the podcast. Let's sort of jump in and review why IoT and OT devices are a separate category from computers and phones when we're thinking about vulnerability management.
Yes, IoT and OT devices are certainly different category than IT devices. These devices are everywhere and come with multiple different names, cyber physical systems, industrial control, medical IoT, OT, IoT, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we come across these devices everywhere. Many of us have them at our home. They are on the road as you're driving to work, in the office buildings, classrooms, hospitals, critical infrastructure, and so on, right? These devices are built for a specific function, and they are not necessarily built with security at heart. And increasingly, because of their presence everywhere, malicious actors are looking to essentially exploit them and cause havoc, or just use those devices as a way to get into customers' networks, right? That's why.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Their deep posture, you certainly need a different type of approach to be able to kind of go about securing these.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is they need to be on the network, but you also can't control them the way you would a traditional IT device, with some kind of agent software to put protection right on the device itself.
That's right. Yeah, you cannot install an agent software. You cannot do a typical type of scans that you would traditionally do in a vulnerability management. If you try to do them, they could sometimes even crash and or get stuck.
So you mean if I want to run a traditional vulnerability scanner, I could actually take out my IoT devices?
Absolutely. Imagine if you are an operator in a critical infrastructure or in a healthcare delivery organization, and somebody tried to scan these devices and they are actually providing some useful function, providing patient care. You don't certainly want to do that type of things, right?
Okay, so then the question is, how do I address this issue if all the equipment, the tools, the process that I'm using traditionally to identify and address vulnerabilities, maybe I can't do with these IoT and OT devices?
Yeah, so we certainly have a different approach to securing these devices. Palo Alto Networks have a solution, and as well as in the industry, offering a more of a passive-based solution where we can identify these devices down to their make and model and software versions that are running on them, and use that knowledge to identify what type of vulnerabilities exist on these devices. And then you need to think about or finding ways to offering a security on these devices from a network point of view. And there are many few approaches where we can offer in terms of some of the things that you could potentially do is you could find the vulnerabilities passively discovered, and then you could think about how you may, let's say a vulnerability is applicable only for a specific type of application or a specific configuration that you have on the device. You may go about actually changing the configuration if you can disable certain application to avoid that vulnerability being present or could be exploited otherwise, right? You could do that.
So you're saying if there's a particular vulnerability and maybe there's not a patch available, I could use essentially the network to say, okay, I know the vulnerability has to come through, this port, this protocol combination. So make sure that doesn't happen. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. And sometimes you may not be able to disable an application on the device or change configuration on the device to avoid that vulnerability. Then that's where a network-based security solution like what we offer with Palo Alto could come in handy to block those threats to come in to the network. Or you can even think about leveraging other solutions like intrusion detection and prevention technologies that you may have to be able to go about actually having a type of a virtual patch to address those specific vulnerabilities.
I think it's also too important to probably highlight that a lot of IoT are small devices, but there's a large number of them. And the idea that you can rectify by replacing or rotating or patching these IoTs like door locks, temperature sensors, as a category, they're extremely difficult to update or patch or fix. They're not, they're often not software operated, if you know what I mean. So
Right. Yes.
Even if you find a vulnerability, in a brand of thing that's in your ceiling, checking that the lights are on, there's a light sensor. The chances that someone's going to come out and patch that in the next 3 months is almost zero.
That's exactly right. That's again kind of plays into the one of the key aspect of these devices, right? In terms of how many of these devices exist, and there's also an aspect of how these devices are being used in an organization can play a huge role. Some of these devices, as Greg, you're saying, could be a
Mm.
simple doorknob or could be a controller on a mission critical furnace that's operating and
Yeah.
producing a manufacturing plant, right?
Or a heart monitor in a hospital is the classic, right? And
Exactly.
you can't just update the code. You have to, bring in certified individuals with insurance cover and, oh my goodness, and you can't just say, I don't have these devices
That's
sometimes.
right. The
Not,
sheer volume of them and the ability to be able to even humanly possibly to update them is simply not possible. And that's
mm,
where you need kind of an aspect of different type of different way to even look at them. For example, I talked about finding a network-based solution, right? That's something that we could think about. There were customers I spoke with. This customer specifically that comes to my mind is operates a huge wind farm, offshore wind farms in Europe. And for them, they only get a few minutes of downtime in a year, right? They are really rushing to perform typical maintenance activities that require to make sure that devices can operate. Now, if you were to schedule patching on top of it, you're likely looking at extended waiting period for before you can even get to thinking about patching, even if it's really possible to do
mm,
so,
that's right.
right?
So really, it has to be in-network mitigation or edge mitigation for these types of devices.
That's right, exactly.
Mm.
And the sheer volume of these devices that you have and the vulnerabilities that are affecting them, you obviously need to have a different way to prioritize them, right? Some of these devices could be simply a business enabler. Let's say if you're a mission critical operator, those devices could be so severe that you cannot afford to lose them. But in a typical organization, if you have a printer or a camera or a doorknob sensor, they are just an enabler. It's not mission critical
Mm.
for your day-to-day operating, and they're not necessarily tied to your business or revenue outcome that you're producing, right? So hence you need to have a different type of prioritization in terms of how you go about even securing or patching these vulnerabilities that exist.
I think what you're drawing a bow at there is this idea that customers' use cases are diverse. IoT devices can be mission critical or they can be trivial. They can be life critical in the case of medical. But your reaction to them has to vary according to the situation. In some cases, you need to either rush out and fix the problem at source, get someone in, patch the devices, or you have to say, this is a fact of life, and I have to have some methodology to just handle this. I have to assume these devices are almost compromised all the time and have a way to cope with anything that comes up, to react to the situation rather than fix the situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's you summarize it very well, Greg. One of the thing when we think about vulnerabilities, we may be thinking about these devices having software vulnerabilities, but sometimes it could be simple configuration things like, hey, you have a default password still on the device, you may need to go and change them, or you just need to disable certain configuration to have them secure, right? Even recently, there was a ruling that got passed, I think first time in the world, UK government happened to be banning
Mm.
any devices that have default passwords that are out on the network to have essentially manufacturers not to allow the devices to be deployed without changing those default passwords, right? That's one simple aspect of it. Now, when it comes to prioritization of these devices and the vulnerabilities that are associated with them, you cannot use the same approach for all these devices for the facts that we just talked about in terms of can you patch them? Is it first of all humanly possible to patch all these hundreds of devices at what time frame, what type of resources you need, and all that. So
Mm.
with that, you need a different type of prioritization approach, right? which takes into consideration of not only the CVE and the severity of the CVE that exists on these devices, but also a method of understanding, hey, how business critical this device is in terms of is this device something like a CFO laptop versus a regular junior engineer or an intern's laptop, right? That type of thinking needs to come into these devices where you're understanding the asset criticality as one of the big factor, how likely or exploitability nature of this vulnerability itself need to be taken into effect in terms of what type of attack vector it is. Is this vulnerability known to be exploited in the wild? Who are the state actors that may be going after these vulnerabilities? Should that device get compromised, what type of business impact you may have, and what type of blast radius that device could provide in terms of, let's say, we talked about fish tank thermometer being leveraged to get into a casino last.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's also related to other topics we've talked to you before about, like microsegmentation and reducing the ability to move laterally. A fish tank should not have access to your data center, fish tank monitor, right? So
Absolutely, yeah. That understanding of the blast radius also could be taken into consideration, and what type of mitigating effects you may have already in place to kind of either you have already segmented the device out or the blast radius has been contained because of other type of mitigative actions that you may have to be able to kind of understand and use that as a way to prioritize.
So I think what you're saying is don't just let the, a high CVE number sort of impact your thinking. There's got to be other considerations you take into account, like how important this is to the business, the blast radius, and so on. It's not just about that high CVE number.
That's absolutely right. And lot of times customers typically don't have that type of framework in place. We are basically providing or encouraging customers to find that type of information at their fingertips to be able to kind of give that easy to prioritize, especially when you're thinking about hundreds and thousands of these IoT, OT devices in any typical organization.
So are there other considerations that you would recommend folks take into account for managing vulnerabilities in their IoT and OT space?
Yeah, I think if I were to just kind of go at a high level, typical would be to say, hey, given the knowledge of this vulnerability exists, what could be done on the device to kind of disable that vulnerability in terms of changing configuration on the device, if it is possible to effectively reduce or eliminate that hack surface or that vulnerability. Thinking about understanding, implementing some zero trust policies that only allow the trusted behaviors to say, hey, any unnecessary communication has been now removed by implementing zero trust policies as a way to kind of contain that. Then you can also think about and take into consideration of, hey, if this exploit is only to be launched through the internet or through other network connectivity, how could you limit that type of access as well, along with the zero trust policies could be one other factor. And finally, given, all these options available, sometimes you may not be even, let's say, disable the application that's vulnerable, or you have to allow certain applications to be communicating because it's required for that device to function. Then there are other mechanisms that we can offer in terms of looking at other security subscriptions, like options of intrusion detection and prevention, or any DNS URL protection, or ability to detect any binary downloads if the exploit were to be sent through a binary to the device. You can think about applying all these different dimensions of security controls organizations may have to be able to kind of provide that additional level of protection. Or you can also think about this as virtual patching as a way to manage these vulnerabilities, especially, given that sometimes you cannot even go about patching these devices easily.
Right. So it sounds like maybe the first step then is actually device discovery and classification. Yes, is that, and where does Palo Alto come into the picture there?
Yes, that's great. Actually, you're right. The key mantra in security is you need to have visibility to everything that you want to go about securing that, right? So Palo Alto IoT and OT security solutions that we offer in the market today provide a passive mechanism to discover these devices using machine learning based technologies to identify not only the device type, but down to the make and model and the software versions that are potentially running on these devices as a way to kind of provide the visibility. And then you don't actually need to deploy any dedicated sensor of sort, which is kind of key requirement in other solutions in the market. Given this solution, IoT, OT security is offered right on our firewall platforms, customers are able to leverage those firewall devices as a sensor in addition to being a security enforcement and prevention function, right? That's something that we offer as a unique offer to help our customers with IoT, OT devices to go about securing them.
Because the firewall is seeing traffic come through it, it's able to look at that traffic to do the device identity?
Absolutely, yeah. So the way we do that is our firewall is have our industry is known for being the next generation firewall. We have DPI capabilities to identify what applications are running. The same exact DPI engine has been enhanced to provide that next level of metadata collection to help us identify these IoT devices, and as well as any behaviors that could potentially be anomalous, right? To identify and then detect and notify our customers. And given we are a firewall platform, we also have continuous trust verification in the platform itself in the form of not only anomaly detection, but also inspecting all the traffic and identifying any threats using advanced security services like threat prevention, URL protection, sandboxing using wildfire and such.
Okay, so this is potentially being able to intercept an attack that might be targeting a vulnerable IoT device.
That's exactly right. So using all these capabilities on our solution, we can not only provide visibility to the devices and the risk and vulnerabilities that are lurking on those devices, you're able to actually apply security controls by only limiting to trusted behaviors that you want to enable, and as well as applying all the security protections on them by blocking essentially any intrusions that are trying to get into the network through these IoT and OT devices. What we have done is that to help our customers, we have introduced recently a risk prioritization framework within our platform that essentially allows our customers to eliminate more than 70% of the CVE noise that's otherwise is there. Because essentially not every single IoT device is necessarily equal from a business risk point of view. We take the device criticality into consideration, and all the other potential mitigative actions that you have already put in place are available within our platform in the form of intrusion prevention to help customers to prioritize to the ones that they really need to focus. And that essentially eliminates more than 70% of the CVE noise.
Well, we are at the end of our time. If folks are looking to address their IoT and OT needs and curious about what Palo Alto might be able to help with, where should they go?
Yeah, so we offer several hands-on workshops for our customers. So customers can find these workshops both on the internet and the show notes today, and you can sign up and get your hands-on in a very controlled environment where you can look at the solution, or you can better yet, take the solution for a free trial in your own environment to discover not only all your IoT OT devices, but also all the vulnerabilities that are impacting your specific network, and see how we can help you prioritize and reduce your attack surface and protect those devices as well.
Okay, yeah, so we'll have the links to that free trial if you want to try it out for yourself, and also links to the various hands-on workshops that you can register for, including an IoT security hands-on workshop, a medical IoT security hands-on workshop, and an industrial OT security hands-on workshop. Well, thank you, Caitlin, for joining us, and thanks to Palo Alto Networks for being a sponsor. And thanks to you for being a listener. We appreciate your time and attention. You can find more of these technical podcasts and our community blog. It's all at packetpushers.net. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can hear us on Spotify. And if you would, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.